Well, I can do that. Just look at the one I sent the link to. That'll show you what it looks like, and then just think of what all you want.
Good late afternoon, everyone.
I'll make it. Good late afternoon.
Thanks. I love that call and response. I am Taffy Benson Clayton, and I have the distinct honor tonight to make an introduction that I'll do in just a few minutes. I also have the honor to serve as the Vice President and Associate Provost for Inclusion and Diversity here at Auburn University. So it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the 2018 fall slate for Critical Conversations. And I'd like to thank each one of you. Some of you are returners, but even if you're new, for engaging in this important way. It has been an enriching developmental experience for our campus community. So to our students who are in the room, during your time here at Auburn, you will undoubtedly be exposed to numerous learning opportunities. Some are going to be formal, some more informal, right? Some will be in classrooms, others in dining facilities, in apartments off campus, residence halls, and in a variety of other co-curricular contexts. Without question, you will interact with people at Auburn, as you should, who see the world very differently from you. At times, you will and should feel uncomfortable. This series is designed to encourage you and to challenge you and to give you the tools that you need to navigate conversations which are often tough and yet critical. Today, we are honored to share this learning moment with Dr. Jonathan Haidt. Dr. Haidt is a social psychologist and professor of ethical leadership at New York University's Stern School of Business. As a scholar who studies morality and emotion, Dr. Haidt has over 100 articles published or in press in top journals in psychology and in science. According to Google Scholar, he has been cited over 55,000 times, and his books provide many on college campuses the opportunity to explore how to engage in discussions about what divides us, be it politics, be it culture, religion, or even other aspects of identity. His text, The Righteous Mind, Why Good People Are Divided by Politics and Religion, was on the New York Times bestseller list. And his new book, The Coddling of the American Mind, How Good Intentions and Bad Ideas Are Setting Up a Generation for Failure, asks the question of how we reached a space where engaged debate of different ideas changed into a culture of fear around potential differences in our conversations. As an advocate for free speech on college campuses with the goal of truth-seeking and increasing knowledge, he challenges readers to consider whether our approaches are helpful or whether they're hurtful to our students. Because of the timeliness of this topic, we see Dr. Haidt's work referenced in national media, and he's appeared in numerous news and educational venues, to include TED Talks, CNN, CBS, MSNBC, and Fox News, as well as at many academic institutions. We are quite fortunate that Dr. Haidt has agreed to join us today, especially given the recent release of his book and his incredibly busy schedule. His ideas today, I believe, will enrich our learning, will challenge us. In some cases, his ideas are in contrast to perspectives that exist, including research and perspectives that have been included in former Critical Conversation Speakers Series contexts. We in the Office of Inclusion and Diversity have rather intentionally sought to design an inclusion and diversity learning strategy for our campus that creates an active and robust marketplace of ideas shared by a range of thought leaders and scholars. It is the work of scholars to be well-read, to seek to understand, to grapple with the tension between competing ideas, well-established research, personal truths, and lived experiences. This is how we sharpen our individual lenses and create the critical thinkers, that's you all sitting out there, who will be vitally important to the future of our nation and of our world. Please allow me to present to you tonight, and I'm delighted to do it, one of the leading, enlightening, and thought-provoking social psychology scholars of our day, a friend, Dr. Jonathan Haidt.
Thank you so much, Taffy, for that lovely introduction. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. I know some of you have midterms. It's wonderful to know that I can do this as a day trip from New York City. I had no idea it was possible to just come here for a day trip, but it is such a different world. In addition to having better weather, you people are really, really nice. And I don't just mean nice, I mean like really polite and thoughtful and hospitable. And it's really noticeable. Like when I ask for water, I don't just get a bottle of water, I get 2 bottles of water, just in case I might need 2. And people are thinking about, you know, what are my needs? What will I need after this? And just even as you walk around, as we're walking around, like people are just very sensitive about, you know, going through doorway. There's a real sense of politeness here. And I'm not just doing this to praise you. You know, usually you want to start off praising your audience. It's actually relevant. It's going to come back in about 15 minutes because I think it's one of the reasons why the problems I'm talking about today that are happening on a lot of campuses, they don't seem to be happening here. They may be coming, they're spreading rapidly. But you do have a unique culture here. You have a culture that is very conducive to doing the difficult work that Taffy was just talking about. Talking about ideas that you find offensive or threatening in some way is hard, but is essential in college and in this country more broadly. How do you do that? That's what people are talking about all over the country. You're in a unique position here to lead the way. That is, things are really going awry at a lot of schools, but you have good leadership and good norms here. You have a chance to really do things differently. I'm very excited to be working with you now. The conversations I've had, the conversations Taffy and I have had, I think we'll be working together for a long time. So what is this guy talking about? What are these problems? What is this really all about? Let's talk about universities. That's the dead one. That's in here. Let's talk about universities and what they are and how they can go wrong. So, in talking about universities, it's very helpful to start with the concept of telos, or telos, I forget how you say it, but if you've read any philosophy, Aristotle always analyzed things in terms of a thing in terms of its telos, or purpose, or goal. So you can say, what is the purpose of a knife? What is the telos of a knife? It's to cut. And so if you have a knife that doesn't cut, it's not a good knife. What is the purpose, or telos, of a physician? It is to heal. So if there's a physician who doesn't heal anyone, he's a terrible physician. What is the telos of university? Call it out. What do you think it is? What's the purpose of university? Call it out.
To educate. Knowledge.
Educate, right? What? Knowledge. Anything else? To create and share knowledge. Right, I think that's the right answer. Historically, in terms of the way we've thought about universities, this is Raphael's painting, The School of Athens, with Plato and Aristotle in the center. And what are these people doing? Are they fighting? No, they're arguing, talking, presenting in this way by contesting with each other with a good set of norms within a community. This is where knowledge comes from. We can't it's very hard to just make up knowledge or discover it on your own. You need to test it. You need it to be challenged. And so the idea that the purpose of university is knowledge is encoded in many of the crests of our universities. So Harvard's whole motto is Veritas, which means truth. Yale is Lux et Veritas, or light and truth. Even for those of you old enough to remember Animal House, at Faber College, their motto was knowledge is good. Your own motto here is for the advancement of science and art. So it's the same idea. That's why you are here. That's why Auburn is here. Now, like many schools, you hired some PR firm who redid your logo to mean nothing whatsoever. But there's a sense about universities, at least the stories we tell about ourselves, the image we have of ourselves is of fearlessness, courage. So I taught for 16 years at UVA, and in many parts of the university you see these words. For here we are not afraid to follow truth wherever it may lead, nor to tolerate any error so long as reason is left free to combat it. Very inspiring words. What's been happening over the last 4 or 5 years is a kind of fearfulness. a new kind of fearfulness. Let me explain. My friend Greg Lukianoff is the president of the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education. They defend students' rights to speak and organize. They defend against usually restrictions from administrators on their speech. So Greg has been doing that since about the year 2000. And in 2007, he had a very serious depression, a suicidal depression. And he committed himself to a hospital. And when he was released, he took a course of training in cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT. And he credits that with saving his life. In CBT, you learn the names of about 15 different cognitive distortions, like catastrophizing, dichotomous thinking, labeling, all sorts of things like that. And so Greg learned these techniques, and then he goes back to his work on campus, and around 2013 to 2014, he sees something new. Up until then, the students are always the ones who wanted full speech rights. They didn't want to be restricted. It was the administrators who were the problem. But beginning in that year, he began to see students asking for restrictions on speech, asking for protections from words and books and speakers that they considered to be dangerous. And this was something new. So he came to talk to me. I'm a psychologist. He read my first book, The Happiness Hypothesis. He came to share his idea with me that somehow universities were beginning to teach students the very cognitive distortions that he had learned to not do. And Greg's idea was, if students are learning to catastrophize and divide everything up into good versus evil, this is going to make them depressed and anxious. This is a really bad idea. So that's what he thought. I thought this was a great idea. So I joined him in writing up an article on this, and we sent it into the Atlantic in January of 2015. It was finally published in August of 2015. Now, what was going on around then, what we were writing about, was the emergence of trigger warnings. So students on some campuses were asking for trigger warnings. If a Greek myth is assigned and there's a rape scene, because in many myths all around the world there is rape, can college students read such a story? Well, they have for generations, but beginning in 2013, some students asked that there should be a warning on such myths. There was a famous example at Brown University. There was going to be a debate between two feminists as to whether America is a rape culture. And some students said, no, we can't allow this. We can't allow someone to come on campus and say that America is not a rape culture. We can't allow that. That'd be very upsetting to some students. And so the president wouldn't disinvite the speaker. She wouldn't cancel the debate. So instead, she supported them in creating a safe space, a place that students could go if they were triggered or traumatized by the existence of this debate. In that safe space, there were cookies and crayons and things like that. As one woman said, a debate between these two could invalidate people's experiences, and that could be damaging. We don't want that to happen. So it's a new attitude that Greg had never seen before about words, books, speakers, and ideas. South Park got into the act, making fun of safe spaces, and you can see in a Google Trends search that these terms, blue is trigger warning, red is microaggression, they didn't exist before about 2013. It's really only in 2014, 2015 that these really emerge. Okay, so something new is happening on campus. Not on all campuses, it wasn't happening here back then, and it's not really happening here today, at least according to the two conversations I had. There are hints of it, you can find it in some departments, but it is not generally happening here at Auburn. Now, we wrote our article it came out in 2015, and it was actually right after that, a few months after that, beginning at Halloween. Many of you may have seen the videos of the protests there, of students screaming at a professor. So there was a wave of protests and demands at dozens and dozens of schools around the country. The protests and demands expand out to dining hall food. Dining hall food was sometimes seen to be offensive. Of course, the biggest examples were, now there was not much violence. Thank God there's been hardly any violence. The two big exceptions were at Berkeley, where there was a lot of violence, a lot of people hurt, although that was more by Antifa rather than by Berkeley students. We don't know, actually, but mostly by Antifa. A lot of violence there. And then a month later, when Charles Murray was speaking at Middlebury College, students attacked him and a professor with him, and the professor has what may be permanent neck and brain damage from that assault. The protesters, Protesters have sometimes taken protest into the classroom. If they're offended by something a professor says, they will come in and protest inside the classroom. They will shout down speakers. Again, this is not common, but it's happening, and most of these things were unthinkable 5 or 7 years ago, but now they are happening with some regularity. Now, so the puzzle that Greg and I set out to answer in our paper originally, in our essay originally, but then so much more happened afterwards that we expanded it into a book. The puzzle is, where did this new moral culture come from? This is not people being evil. This is students fighting for what they think is good and right and noble and important. It's a very different morality than most of us from the previous generation have on campus. So what is it? The hallmarks of this new morality are things like safe spaces, trigger warnings, microaggressions, bias response teams where administrators respond if someone tells a joke that someone else finds offensive. There's a team that will come in and investigate and administer punishment if necessary. Seeing America or the university as a matrix of oppression, having a call-out culture where people can be, if you say one word that someone doesn't like, they will call you out publicly and shame you. So students have to be very defensive in their speech. I was very pleased to see in my discussion today with some students that doesn't seem to be really happening here. So the heart of the puzzle is that there are students now on many campuses who think that they are fragile. This is what Greg noticed. Students have protested speakers since the 1960s, but they never said, if this person speaks on campus, I will be damaged, my friend will be traumatized. They never said that until 2013, 2014. Where did that come from? Some students think that they need protection from words, books, and speakers. So that's what the book is about. The new book is a great expansion, a vast expansion. We've learned a lot since we wrote the article. In very brief, I won't go into this, but it's a fascinating sociological puzzle. Whenever you get a new morality, it can't come out of thin air. So we trace 6 different causal threads, 6 historical reasons why this burst forth in 2014, 2015. Rising political polarization, left and right really hate each other in this country now, much more than they did 10 or 20 years ago. Rising anxiety and depression, which I'll show you in a moment. Paranoid parenting and the decline of free play. We changed the way we raise kids in the late 80s and throughout the 90s. The growth of bureaucracy at universities, and changing ideas about social justice. All of these things came together to create, we believe, a new morality that burst forth, especially in New England and the West Coast, at universities there. It hasn't spread all across the country, but it is spreading, and there's some hints of it around here that you need to know about. Now, the book is structured around 3 great untruths, 3 really terrible ideas. Ideas so bad that if you believe all 3, you will probably be a failure in life. So what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Always trust your feelings. And life is a battle between good people and evil people. And if you believe all 3 of those, you will always be angry and feel threatened. You will never be able to really throw yourself into things, enjoy life, cooperate with people in the way that we hope that people will do on a college campus. I won't talk about, I'll briefly mention the second and third, but I'll focus on the first. So my first book, The Happiness Hypothesis, what I did was I read the wisdom literature of many cultures, and I extracted every psychological claim I could find, and I grouped them into 10. There were 10 major ones, and I evaluated whether or not they're true. So I wrote this book in 2006, and basically 3 of the chapters are the opposite of the 3 great untruths. So let's start. Chapter 7 of this book is on the uses of adversity. Every society has realized that children, and adults too, need adversity to grow strong. We can't reach maturity without adversity. So here's the bad idea. Here's the great truth. People are anti-fragile. I'll explain that in a moment. But it's captured in Nietzsche's dictum that what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. It's a great truth. It's universally true. In China, in ancient China, Mencius wrote that when heaven is about to confer a great responsibility on any man, it will exercise his mind with suffering, subject his sinews and bones to hard work, and place obstacles in the path of his deeds so as to stimulate his mind, harden his nature, and improve wherever he is incompetent. So all around the world, people know this. This is a great truth. It is a psychological truth. It is the idea of anti-fragility. That is a clunky word that Nassim Taleb, the guy who wrote The Black Swan, Nassim Taleb had to make it up because we don't have a word for this in English. So we think some things are fragile. A wine glass is fragile, so if you knock it over, nothing good will happen. It will break. So don't knock over wine glasses. That's why we give our kids plastic cups, because they are resilient. Plastic is resilient, it's not fragile. But if a kid knocks a cup off the table, nothing good happens. It doesn't get stronger, it doesn't become a better cup. What Taleb was after was that there are certain systems that need to be knocked off the table. They need to be pushed, shoved, punched, excluded. They need to experience hardship in order to mature. He was talking originally about the banking system, that the banking system in America had become fragile, and he was one of the few who predicted the financial crisis because he could see our banking system hasn't been tested. If anything goes wrong, the whole thing's going down, and he was right. So he writes this book, and he gives lots of examples, including bone. So bone is anti-fragile. If you take it easy on your bones, if you fly to Mars and you don't use your bones, you're in zero gravity for 7 months, your bones will get weak. Your bones need to be tested and stressed in order to stay strong. The immune system is the classic example, which I'll show you in a moment, and then children. So here's the evidence on the immune system. As many of you may have heard, there's what's called the hygiene hypothesis. If you keep your kids safe from bacteria, you prevent their immune system from developing. They need exposure to bacteria. It's been clearly demonstrated with peanuts. Raise your hand if, when you were in school at any point, peanuts were banned. Raise your hand high. So only the youngest people in here. Anyone over 30, you're like, what? Unless you have kids, in which case you know you can't bring peanuts into a school anymore. So why have peanut allergies been rising? Peanut allergies are 3 times more prevalent now than they were in the 1990s. Why? It turns out some immunologists were wondering about this, and they noticed that the problem only arises in countries that tell pregnant women to not eat peanuts. So if women don't eat peanuts while they're pregnant in order to protect the babies, it turns out that might actually give them peanut allergies. So they tested it experimentally in a very direct test. As they noticed, it's only in countries that advocate avoidance of peanuts that the rate is rising. And so here's the test. It was based on the hypothesis that if kids regularly eat peanut-containing products, then that will stimulate their immune system. The immune system will learn that peanuts are harmless. Instead of if you protect them from peanuts, later on they will treat peanuts as an allergen, a strange chemical that must be fought. So here's what they did. They randomly assigned 640 infants, or obviously parents of infants, who were at high risk of peanut allergy because they had some other immune issue. And they were randomly assigned either to consume peanut dust. There's an Israeli snack, which is puffed corn with a dusting of peanut powder on it. So kids love it. Half of the kids at each 6 months or so were given this snack food that has peanut powder on it. Half were given the standard advice, no peanuts. What happens? In the kids who got the standard treatment, which is they were kept safe from peanuts, 14% of them, when tested at age 5, 14% had a peanut allergy. So for the rest of their lives, they're going to have to avoid peanuts. Of the kids who were given peanut dust to eat, 2%. In other words, peanut allergies were almost wiped out by giving kids peanuts. So the scientists on the study, they wrote that for decades we recommended that they avoid consuming such things. Our findings suggest that this advice was incorrect and may have contributed to the rise in peanut butter and other food allergies. So this is an example of how good intentions and bad ideas can damage kids, can set them up for failure. All right, let's try that again. Let's take the whole kid and protect the whole kid from dangerous experiences, unpleasant experiences, threats, inclusions, insults, exclusions, insults. Let's protect our kids. They are very vulnerable. Have you ever seen a newborn? They're like, they would break if you don't hold them the right way. They're so fragile. Let's protect them. And I guess let's keep protecting them because even at age 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12, they're fragile, they're vulnerable, bad things can happen. We've got to be there for them. Someone has to be there for them. And then we send them off to college, and many of them still need protection. And after they graduate, we have to help them find a job. And oh, why is he moving back into our basement? I don't know, honey. Why do you think that is? Kids need exposure to risk. Now, some risk is too much. Kids could actually die on this playground. So this, I'm not recommending this, but I am recommending this. This is a playground where you could get hurt. You really could get hurt, but you're very unlikely to die. Now, what's the alternative? Many of you grew up on playgrounds like this. Well, that's toddlers, but this is for age 7, 8, 9. This is too safe. This is a bad playground because there is no risk. That might sound strange to say, but look at it this way. This was a really interesting article in the Wall Street Journal. A very well-known developmental psychologist, Alison Gopnik, reviewed the research on play and risk, and she concludes that kids in the last 20 years or so, many of them have what she calls risk deprivation syndrome. If you're not exposed to risk, you don't learn to develop normal abilities to judge risk for yourself and face it. So she says, trying to eliminate all such risks from children's lives may be dangerous. There may be a psychological analog to the hygiene hypothesis, which explains why allergies are going up. And then she says, in the same way, by shielding children from every possible risk, we may lead them to react with exaggerated fear to situations that aren't risky at all, and isolate them from the adult skills that they will one day have to master. We're talking about risks here like a book or a speaker coming to your campus. These are risks that millennials were able to face without blinking an eye. But some students, not you here at Auburn, but some students at many other schools find this too dangerous. The basic dictum in child rearing, first of all, the basic dictum is prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. Parents can't be there. I mean, parents can sweep ahead of the children just so long. At some point, the kids are going to go out, and the parents aren't going to be there to snowplow ahead of them. In Britain, they're beginning to realize this. Britain is in many ways right with us. They're doing the same, they have the same problems that we have at their universities and with their rising suicide rates that I'll show you in a moment. But recently, Britain has begun to reintroduce risk. Now, if you look closely, what this kid is doing is he's learning about levers in physics. He's going to jump on this, and this is going to shoot some bricks up in the air. Okay, this might be a case where the monitor might want to step in and, because he could get hit in the head with it. But at least the point is, he'll learn. But what do we do in America? In America, we double down. We say college students have to be protected from risk. So some schools are banning snowball fights, because what if you get hit in the eye? And super soaker fights, because again, I guess you could get hit in the eye with water, I don't know. So I want to ask a question of you. As I've been talking about the book over the last month, I'm going around the country, and there's a very interesting pattern in response to this question. So we're going to do it by cohort. So the question I have for all of you is, when were you let out? At what age were you allowed to go outside all by yourself and then be out with your friends all by yourselves, no adults supervising you, you can roam where you want, and then you come home? So just as some guidance, if that was the case in first grade, then probably it was roughly age 6. If it didn't happen until 11th grade, that would be roughly age 16. So everybody think of your number. At what age roughly were you let out? Now we're going to do it in 3 cohorts. One is pre-millennials, that is Gen X and baby boomers. So if you were born before 1982, raise your hand high right now. Everybody's okay. Just you with your hands up. Just yell it out. What's your number?
5, 6, 8.
So you heard 5, 6, and 8. Nobody at 7 for some reason. But okay. But 5. Everybody was 5, 6, 7, or 8. Okay. Everybody was 5 to 8. That's the way it always was. Okay. Now let's do the millennials. So if you're born between 1982 and 1994, as I'll show you, the millennials end at 1994. A lot of you think you're millennials. You're not. Okay. So if you were born between 1982 and 1994, raise your hand high. Okay, so you guys you're true millennials. What's your number? Call it out. Okay, so mostly over 10, we had a few 6 and 8, all right? So you're the transitional generation because this changes in the 1990s, all right? So millennials are in the middle. But watch what happens when we go to Gen Z or iGen. So if you were born in 1995 or later, raise your hand high. Okay, that's the undergrads. So all of you, just call out your number. A couple of 6 and 8s, but mostly 10, 12, 14, okay? Earlier, was anybody's number 15 or 16? Raise your hand if it was 15 or 16. Raise your hand high. So there are few you weren't let out until you got a driver's license. Actually, and you might not even have gotten a driver's license, as I'll show you in a moment. All right, so something really changed in the 90s with the way we were raising kids. The most authoritative source on this is a book called iGen by Jean Twenge, and she points out that we all thought that the millennials were those birth years. It was a reasonable assumption. But it turns out, from looking at the data, national data on teenage behavior, there's a sharp change that begins with birth year 1995. And she calls it iGen, although I think Gen Z is likely to win. But there are big changes for adolescents that kick in around there for adolescents who were born 1995 and later. And so here's some of the basic data. If we look at the percentage of 12th graders who have a driver's license, that's the top line. Now, those of you who were the baby boomers or older, you're thinking, what do you mean? Why wouldn't someone have, unless you live in lower Manhattan, why would any American not get a driver's license the day that he or she turned 16? Why wouldn't you? But what we're seeing is that it begins to drop a bit with the millennials, but it's especially in the last few years, the rate is only down to 75%. Percent that have tried alcohol is dropping. Percent that have ever gone out on a date is dropping. The percent that have ever worked for pay is dropping. So Gen Z is not going out as much, is not hitting what we would think of as adolescent milestones that are maybe a bit rebellious or independent. If they're not doing these things, what are they doing? They're spending a lot more time, Doing what? Playing video games and on social media. They sit on their beds or wherever they sit, and they interact with others through devices. They don't need a driver's license. They don't need to go out on dates. So when iGen enters the data set, or Gen Z, things really change. Now, you might say, well, okay, some of those are good. They're not drinking and driving. They're not getting in accidents. So you might think, well, this is mostly good. But here's the problem. Because Gen Z is not developing normal independence, they're not learning. And it's not their fault. They've been overprotected. That's what coddled means, overprotected. Because they've been denied the right to go out and learn how to be independent, they are much more fragile. They are much more vulnerable. When bad things happen, it hits them much harder. And you see this in the rates of depression and anxiety. So when iGen or Gen Z enters the data set, the rate for boys, this is answering yes to 5 or more of 9 symptoms of major depression. So the rate for boys does go up, but the rate for girls goes way up. We say the same thing for college students. When iGen, so in 2012, all of the students pretty much were millennials. There were no iGen students or Gen Z students on campus in 2012. They arrive in 2013. The first wave comes in 2013. By 2016, it's all iGen pretty much. And now we see that roughly 1 in 6 college women say that they have a mental disorder. When it was the millennials, it was only 5%. Now it's 15%. So something is changing, especially for girls, especially for teenage girls. Some people have argued, well, it's not real. It's just this generation, your generation, for the undergrads, you're so comfortable talking about mental health. You're comfortable talking about depression and anxiety. Well, that's great. You're more open about it. There's no crisis. There's no epidemic. But look at these data. This is the rate per 100,000 of teenage girls who are admitted to a hospital every year because they have harmed themselves physically, mostly cutting themselves, also drinking poison. These are non-fatal self-harm, not quite suicide, but cutting yourself especially. And so what you see is from 2001 to 2009, no trend, no change. But as soon as the iPhone comes out and people are on social media, that's one of the theories, the rates go up. Notice it does not go up for the millennials. It's only for those it's especially for those who are in late teen years. But look at the percentage increase. These are young girls. These are 10 to 14-year-old girls. Their rate of hospitalization was very low all the way until here. And then look how much it goes up, several 100% increase for the youngest girls. So something's going very wrong for American girls. And you see it especially in the suicide rate. So the suicide rate was fairly stable in the first 10 years of the 21st century. But again, whether you call this Gen Z or whether you call it the arrival of social media, the result is the same. The rate for boys, this is the rate of completed suicides. So young women attempt suicide more often, but they use reversible means. Young men attempt less, but when they attempt, it's usually with a gun or a jump off of a tall building or something, so it's irreversible. So the rate is higher. The rate is up, just for the last 2 years, it's up 25% from 10 years before. That is a gigantic increase. For young women, it's up 70%. The suicide rate for American teenage girls is up 70%. This is very, very serious. College is not causing this. Greg and I thought originally that universities were teaching students to think in depressed and anxious ways. No, they came into college already much more anxious and depressed beginning in 2013. And so when we were writing our article, we had lots of anecdotes all over the country. The mental health centers were saying, we're inundated, we can't keep up with demand, we don't know what to do. But we didn't have the hard data on it until a couple years later. So once again, somehow or other, we're doing something so that Gen Z, the generation of undergrad today, is having a lot more trouble. Now, I hope I've convinced you that the basic principle, or one basic principle of development is anti-fragility. We need to be tested, we need to be let out, we need to get lost and find our way home, we need to fail, we need to fall down and cut our knee and not have a parent there to pick us up, but figure out how to stop the bleeding and then live home. We need all these things. Imagine a university that was based on the idea what doesn't kill you makes you weaker. Imagine what it would be like to attend such a place. What would the policies be there? How protective would the deans and professors be at such a school? Conversely, imagine a university based on a different principle. What would that look like? I'd like to show you the best articulation of what it should look like. This is the most brilliant, like off-the-cuff speech by Van Jones, a progressive activist who was in the Obama White House. And at the University of Chicago, which has really stood out as not overprotecting students, as not disinviting speakers, they had, there was somebody from the Trump administration had spoken there, Corey Lewandowski. Some students protested, they wanted him disinvited. So there was a big brouhaha in Chicago about 2 years ago. And so Van Jones then comes to speak. David Axelrod has a talk show where he interviews visiting speakers. So Axelrod interviews Van Jones, and he asks him, what do you think about if somebody comes that the students find hateful, what should they do? Should that person be disinvited? What do you think? And just listen to it's a 3.5-minute clip, but it just perfectly illustrates what I just told you and then applies it to a college campus. Oh, wait, hold on a second. Am I going to have to? Oh, here we are. Okay. Should be right up there.
A lot of anger and a lot of rage about what this administration is doing, and the sense that don't have anybody associated with him because then you're normalizing the administration. And, I mean, I have a different view, but I'm interested in yours.
Look, I don't like bigots and bullies. I just want to point that out. I'm against bigots, I'm against bullies. So just leave that as it is.
Those who like bigots and bullies, raise your...
Yeah, exactly. But I'm going to say I got tough talk for my liberal colleagues on these campuses. And they don't tend to like it, but they tend to like me, so I get away with it. So I'm going to keep trying to push.
Let's test the proposition.
Exactly. I want to push this. There are two ideas about safe spaces. One is a very good idea, and one is a terrible idea. The idea of being physically safe on a campus, not being subjected to sexual harassment and physical abuse or something like that, or being targeted specifically personally for some kind of hate speech, you are an N-word, whatever. Hey, perfectly fine with that. Perfectly fine with that. But there's another view that is now, I think, ascendant, which I think is just a horrible view, which is that I need to be safe ideologically. I need to be safe emotionally. I just need to feel good all the time. And if someone says something that I don't like, that is a problem for everybody else, including the administration. And I think that is a terrible idea for the following reason. I don't want you to be safe ideologically. I don't want you to be safe emotionally. I want you to be strong. That's different. I'm not going to pave the jungle for you. Put on some boots and learn how to deal with adversity. I'm not going to take all the weights out of the gym. That's the whole point of the gym. This is the gym. You can't live on a campus where people say stuff you don't like, and these people can't fire you. They can't arrest you. They can't beat you up. They can just say stuff you don't like, and you get to say stuff back. And this you cannot bear. This is ridiculous BS liberals. My parents and Monica Elizabeth Peake's parents, hello Monica, were marched. They dealt with fire hoses. They dealt with dogs. They dealt with beatings. You can't deal with a mean tweet? You are creating a kind of liberalism that the minute it crosses the street into the real world is not just useless, but obnoxious and dangerous. I want you to be offended every single day on this campus. I want you to be deeply aggrieved and offended and upset, and then to learn how to speak back. Because that's what we need from you in these communities.
It's hard to believe that he just pulled that out. And that's amazing. He just pulled that out of the air. It is as perfect, as focused, as strongly argued as could be. So that's the point about adversity and anti-fragility. And that's a vision for what a campus would look like based on this piece of wisdom. Now, very briefly, I'll do the other two very briefly. Chapter 2 of the happiness hypothesis was on the most widespread ancient idea, which is not this, always trust your feelings. It's actually kind of the opposite. The number one ancient truth, the number one insight of every society that has left us writing on social affairs and social relationships is that we don't see the world as it is, we see the world through various filters. So as Epictetus put it, what really frightens and dismays us is not external events themselves, but the way in which we think about them. It is not things that disturb us, but our interpretation of their significance. Shakespeare said there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. John Milton said the mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. The Buddha said something similar. Your worst enemy cannot harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded. But once mastered, no one can help you as much, not even your father or your mother. This is ancient wisdom. This is deeply psychologically true. This is the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy. This is exactly the insight that led to the therapy that saved Greg's life. Aaron Beck, a psychiatrist at Penn, discovered this in the 1960s. Several other people did too at the same time. What Beck discovered is that his depressed patients, clinically depressed, hospitalized patients, had three interlocking beliefs: that the world is bad, my future is dark, and I'm bad. And each one reinforces the others. And they were very good at defending these beliefs. But if he could argue with them and get them to question one of them, then at least briefly they'd be released and they could see that the others were false. Now then, a few hours later, they'd be right back into their pit of despair. But what he found is that if he worked with them and taught them to do it themselves, to question their own beliefs, to look for evidence, within a few weeks, their depression would lift. And this is the basis of CBT today. In CBT, you learn all these distortions: mind reading, fortune telling, catastrophizing, overgeneralizing, discounting positives. These aren't just clinical symptoms. These are good thinking. This is what critical thinking is really all about. And so the most basic one of all is emotional reasoning. We're all driven by our feelings to some extent. When we let our reasoning be guided by our feelings, we get pretty much the state of affairs in American politics today. No, I mean, there's more to it than that. But the point is, the more angry we get, the more fruitless it is for us to give each other reasons. This was the central idea in our original paper. I just want to apply it to one concept, the microaggression concept. I know you had Dewal Wing Su in here to talk about microaggressions. I'd like to question that notion. I think it's a concept that does one thing really well, but then raises problems in two different ways. So here's what it does well. So microaggressions are brief, commonplace, daily, verbal, behavioral, or environmental indignities, whether intentional or unintentional, that communicate hostile, derogatory, or negative racial slights toward people of color, but then it's expanded to members of all identity groups. So what it gets right, I think, is that as explicit racism has declined very, very sharply since the 1960s, it's useful to have a term that gets at little deniable, little digs or jokes or things that one could say that they are meant aggressively, but they're small and deniable. It is useful to have such a term. It is useful to tell incoming students about this, to be on the lookout for it, and to not do it. So that I think it's right about. The other thing that it's right about is that there's a whole bunch of other things that are not malintentioned, they're not hostile, but the cumulative effect is really annoying, dispiriting, or marginalizing. So especially, for example, anybody in this country who isn't obviously white, black, or East Asian, if you're anything other than those three, if you're biracial in any way, people often ask you, what are you? Who, what do they want to know? People want to know what your ancestry is. What category do I put you in? Now, you can decide for yourself whether that's hostile or whether it's not, but I totally get that it can get annoying after a while. So we need a term for this. That's the other thing that it gets right, is that there is a large group of things that students of color, LGBT, all sorts of people have to deal with that maybe aren't hostile, but we should stop doing them. We should teach people to stop doing them in a diverse community. But should we call these microaggressions? What happens when we call them microaggressions? I think a much better word for that is faux pas. Now, once again, we don't have a good word for this in English, so we had to borrow the French. It literally means a false step, a faux pas, a false step. A faux pas is an embarrassing or tactless act in a social situation. It's a mistake, a blunder, a gaffe. So, yeah, if you're creating a diverse community, yes, you should educate students to not ask questions that get on people's nerves. I think we should call those faux pas. Unfortunately, when he defined them as including unintentional and even well-intentioned, when he did that, he was basically saying intentions don't matter. And if you say to people, intentions don't matter, you should react. Whether they meant you harm or not is irrelevant. You should react as though it was an act of aggression. This is really, really bad for the people you're telling this to. Here's why. So there's a new idea on campus that it's impact that matters, not intent. Don't worry about what the person intended. All that matters is how you feel. Always trust your feelings. If you feel annoyed, excluded, marginalized, then you were attacked. It was an act of aggression. I think this has some very, very bad effects on efforts to improve diversity and inclusion for this reason. We're all trying to create more diverse communities. Almost every school in the country is trying very hard to increase diversity of a variety of types. That has many benefits. But if you're trying to create a more inclusive community, more diverse and more inclusive, there are two ways you can go. Option A is you can teach students to be more polite, so don't commit so many faux pas. Here are the things that annoy the black students. Here are the things that annoy the East Asian students. Here are the things that, don't do this, okay? So let's teach people to be more polite, but at the same time, let's also, in our community, when we're trying to work this out, let's give each other the benefit of the doubt. And if it's not clear that there was hostile intent, don't treat it like there's hostile intent. So that's option A, or we could go with option B, which is teach students to not look at intent. All that matters is impact. Also, when something happens, interpret it in the most hostile, interpret it in the worst way possible. Do not give the benefit of the doubt, do the opposite. And also, here's the number where you can report people who have said something that offended you. That's option B. Let's play this out over the course of 4 or 5 years. At which school are black students going to feel more included and welcome? At which school are trans students going to feel more included and welcome? At which school is there going to be just constant conflict and reporting and division? So this is why I think you have to do it all at the same time. You have to teach students to be more polite, but also to give each other the benefit of the doubt. Oh, fine. Okay, good. That'll be fine. All right, so that's psychological principle number 2. Always trust your feelings. Imagine what it would be like to attend a university built on both of the great untruths. What would daily life be like? What would conversation be like? Or conversely, imagine one built more by Van Jones and Aaron Beck. The last one I'll do very briefly, the faults of others. So life is a battle between good people and evil people. We think about that very easily. That's our default way of thinking. We're tribal creatures. We're prone to dichotomous thinking and tribalism. One of the quotes we open the book with is from Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a Russian. He was put in a gulag, in a labor camp for a long time because he wrote something bad about Joseph Stalin in a letter to a friend, and the government read the letter. But at one point he writes, "The line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being." We all know this is true. We all know that we're capable of good and evil. But we tend to forget that when judging others. And that's why ancient sages in every culture urge us to be less hypocritical. First, take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye. I never found a text where people sit, where the ancients counseled us, you know what? You should be a lot angrier at people. You should judge people a lot more harshly and be a lot less forgiving. Combine that with our tendency towards tribalism, captured in the Bedouin saying, I against my brothers, I and my brothers against my cousins, I and my brothers and cousins against the world. So it's complicated to get into identity politics. In the book, we don't say, oh, identity politics is bad. You have to have identity politics. You have to have an organized effort to knock down barriers, to fight injustices that are based on identity lines and markers. So identity politics is necessary, but what kind of identity politics? In the book, we contrast common enemy identity politics, where you try to unite people against one group, who's the oppressor, versus common humanity identity politics. You try to draw a larger circle to include everyone, and then you have a basis for saying some of our brothers and sisters are being denied equal rights or equal dignity. And what's so exciting to me is that just in the last year, we're seeing all these great books and articles coming out rethinking identity politics. Not one of these authors is white. African Americans are diverse. They think different things about identity politics. Gay professors are diverse. like Anthony Appia, Asian professors, Asian Americans like Francis Fukuyama and Amy Chua. So we're seeing this wonderful flowering of diversity of thinking within our diverse academic population. So there's a lot of great new thinking. It's a very exciting time to be rethinking this. One of the best ideas in the book is from Pauli Murray, a civil rights activist writing in the 1940s. She says, when my brothers try to draw a circle to exclude me, I shall draw a larger circle to include them. Where they speak out for the privileges of a puny group, I shall shout for the rights of all mankind. And this is a technique that was used by Martin Luther King, by Nelson Mandela, obviously in his later years, not his early years. So what I'd like you to imagine again is imagine attending a university that taught all three of those. What would it be like? It would be constant fighting, hatred, hostility. Conversely, imagine one designed by Van Jones, Aaron Beck, and Pauli Murray. Which one would you rather attend? So, just to conclude, let's try to draw some implications for what you might do here at Auburn. I think you're already well ahead of the game. And here's why I'm so excited for. Here's why I think you're so far ahead of the game. So, a lot of campuses, it's thought that students on the right want free speech. And that's why they bring in Milo Yiannopoulos or someone, or Richard Spencer, to provoke the liberals, to provoke the progressives. Free speech, the First Amendment. And then people on the left are focused on diversity and inclusion, and they think that people on the right are just racists. And so if you get this battle between, authoritarian leftists and Nazi racist rightists, this is unsolvable. Once you conceive of the debate in this way, it is unsolvable. So what do? The step one is you have to break out of that binary. You can't think of it in those terms. There are other ways to think about it. My view is we have to do all of the issues at the same time. These are all issues about our speech culture on campus. What is it like to engage in a good faith discussion in class or in a dorm room or anywhere? What's the speech culture on your campus? And the culture here seems pretty healthy. You don't have a call-out culture. People generally seem like they feel able to speak. So the key to focus on is not free speech. I think it's participation in conversation with those who differ without fear of exclusion, shaming, or intimidation. Taffy has a better formulation. It's authentic and what?
Honest and authentic.
Honest and authentic. Does everyone feel that they can engage in honest and authentic discussion? At many schools in this country, they don't. They're afraid people self-censor, they silence. As one young woman said, her rule is silence is safer. Just shut up and you won't get in trouble. What kind of an attitude is that for a college student? Well, at many universities, it's the attitude of survival. So you have to, in order to get to this place, to break out of the binary, you have to reframe and make an uplifting appeal. And only trusted leaders have the authority to do that. So here's one. Ruth Simmons, the first African-American president of an Ivy League school. When there were these sorts of conflicts on her campus at Brown in the 1990s, David Horowitz, a right-wing bomb thrower, metaphorically speaking, was invited to campus. A lot of students on the left were upset. They wanted him disinvited. And she said, learning is the antithesis of comfort. The collision of views and ideologies is in the DNA of the academic enterprise. We do not need any collision avoidance technology here. She went to the talk and she sat in the front row. You know who else does that? This woman. I was so pleased on my way down. I've discovered this New York Times article where in the wake of the horrors in Charlottesville, Auburn's trying a contrasting approach. Experience-informed strategy, said Taffy Benson Clayton. It's about engaging with people who think differently in ways that are constructive. If anything, Spencer and Charlottesville has really intensified our resolve. Disasters and tragedies and adversities can be turned to your advantage. Good things can come out of them if you have skillful leadership. And again, that's why I'm so optimistic about things here at Auburn. So I think Taffy and her staff are doing an amazing job from what I've seen today. My group, some people working with it, we've created a program called Open Mind. But Taffy, who's using it now? Are some students using it now yet?
Yes, we have the Honors College collaborating with our unit OIG. Several members of our team are teaching the Open Minds opportunity led by Gary Morgan, Ada Wilson. There are others. Forgive me for leaving out others. Timothy Fair and Edward Reynolds, I believe.
Okay, so you're already testing it here. We just developed it a year and a half ago, but it's getting rave reviews. We've got data to show that it works. What it does, it's a program. Each step takes 5 steps. Each takes about 20 minutes. We first explain why you'll benefit from talking to people you disagree with. Then we actually play with your emotions. We actually try to trigger feelings of humility. You read quotes from the ancients, from Jesus and Buddha and Mandela and others. Then you learn a little psychology. You learn about confirmation bias and why it's so hard for us to talk to other people. You see the limits of your own moral universe. And then you learn skills to engage in constructive disagreement. So we've developed a tool that we think will help. You are one of the leading schools testing it out here. We're working with about 4 or 5 schools. You're one of them. So we're very optimistic that this is helping. I won't keep the whole sales pitch here, but we have data showing that it is actually working. Visit openmindplatform.org. You can use this in your church or synagogue or in your company or your soccer team, anything. It helps people bridge divides. And so I'd like to end. This is a little thing I've informally just started saying. We are all drowning in outrage. Every day, if you're on social media or even just email, you get stories and videos showing, if you're on the left, you get things about horrible people on the right, or vice versa, doing things that are so despicable that you really, really hate them, and you think that they have no right to exist. They're terrible, terrible people. So left and right now are convinced of this about each other. So I think what we really need to do to survive, if we're going to survive into this age of outrage, living with social media, where we all have the opportunity to become 50 times more outraged than we were 10 or 15 years ago, we got to do something about it. So I'm going to just suggest, you don't have to say this with me, I'm going to suggest we all say this out loud. It's not like a formal pledge. Let's just say it and see how it sounds. See how it sounds if you like the way it sounds as you're saying it. We'll just do the parts in bold. See if you're willing to say it with me. On the count of 3. 1, 2, 3. I will give less offense. I will take less offense. I will pass on less offense. If we could all do that, we would still be a lot more outraged than we were 10 years ago, but it would be a lot better than it is today. So, all right, just give that a try. See if that works for you and your community. So in conclusion, if you want a community like this, if you want a great university that discovers new knowledge and passes it on, you should build your university not on the unwisdom, but on the wisdom. From what I can see so far, you're doing it. It's been a pleasure to talk with you. I'd love to take your questions.
We have time for about 2 questions. We're over schedule, but we certainly wouldn't want
I'm so sorry.
folks not to get that opportunity. So who has a question? No question? Right here.
So you talk about at the end of your book, you say that you predict things will get better. And one of the reasons you give for that is that college administrators are very much opposed to the idea of safetyism, but they're politically afraid to speak out.
That's right.
Can you dig into that a little bit more?
Yes. So while I am somewhat pessimistic, I'm pessimistic about the future of American politics. I don't see any sign that that's going to get better in the next few years. But I am optimistic about the state of American universities, because what has happened is a number of universities have sort of gone off the deep end and developed very bad norms. But what I found in talking with university presidents is that they almost all believe in free speech, liberal values, traditional classical liberal values, liberal arts, but they've been politically afraid to stand up for them. Sometimes because it's their faculty that are intimidating them, sometimes it's the students they're afraid of offending. And so at first, almost all the presidents just gave in and gave students whatever they wanted, including new policies that were really going to make things worse. But now I think it's clear that giving into such demands is bad. The alumni get upset, donations drop off, and the demands don't lead to a good future. So I think there is a real, this new culture came in very quickly in 2014, 2015, and it took a lot of people by surprise. I think now we understand it a lot better, and now I think we have the tools to actually address all of the issues, including the diversity and inclusion issues at the same time. So I think we're going to see a change this year. I think they're ready, we have the resources. So it's a prediction. I may well be wrong, but my prediction is this will be the turning point this year.
Another question. Question from the group, going once.
Yes, ma'am.
Related to what you just said, I know that you co-founded the Heterodox Academy. So tell me a little bit, or tell us about how you feel like that is influencing what you're seeing as a positive future of universities. And how does that work?
Oh, certainly. Thank you. So the question was about Heterodox Academy. So I was always on the left when I was younger. When I wrote my book, The Righteous Mind, it was originally an attempt to help the Democrats speak better about political psychology. In doing the research for the book, I discovered you actually need to read conservatives and learn conservative ideas in order to understand social issues. So I became very convinced of the value of viewpoint diversity. At the same time, I noticed there is none in the social sciences. In economics, the left-right ratio is 4 to 1. That's 4 people on the left for everyone on the right. That's the only one that has any diversity. In my field, it's 17 to 1. In sociology and anthropology, it's 20 to 30 to 1. So the social sciences in particular, everybody's on the left. And that damages the quality of our research. So I created this I co-founded it with some other people in 2015 to advocate for the value of viewpoint diversity among the professors. This is just about the professors, about the quality of research. And we founded it in September of 2015, and then all the protests began a few months later. Suddenly the campus climate and the students were demanding reforms that we thought would be counterproductive, more political orthodoxy, we thought. So I've since handed off Heterodox Academy. I'm a professor. I don't want to run an organization. I want to read and write books and things. So I hired a wonderful woman to run it, Deb Mashik. She is really good at building relationships. She's really good at working on campuses. So Heterodox Academy, it was originally founded to just bring about more diversity among the faculty in their political viewpoints. Now it's working at improving the campus climate in exactly the ways that we've been talking about. We all benefit from viewpoint diversity. So if you're interested in this, go to heterodoxacademy.org. In fact, raise your hand if you are a professor in any way. If you're listed as a professor, raise your hand high. Okay, all of you with your hands up, I invite you to go to heterodoxacademy.org and join. Look at the signing statement, look at what it is that we do, what it is that we believe. We are the only group that I know of that is politically balanced. About 20% of our members are on the left, 20% on the right, and the rest are people who don't fit in or they're centrists. So we are not a political organization. We are a group of faculty members who love universities and want to increase viewpoint diversity. Okay, well, thanks very much. Thanks all for your time and your questions.
So our bookstore has made copies of Coddling of the American Mind available outside for purchase. Dr. Haidt is willing also to sign the books. So we'll be moving in that direction here in just a moment. Also keep in mind that Frank Bruni from the New York Times will be joining us for our next Critical Conversation speaker series. We'll be sending out information in that regard. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much. It was nice hearing you, nice meeting you.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, this is great. Yeah.
That's what The Righteous Mind is the book. Yeah, the new book is not so much.
Right, yeah, but this is great. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
How about
Like tomorrow, I can say y'all.
Now, you mentioned the fact that
Nice to see you again.
but all the time.
student, so I'm familiar with things that now that we got the same time.
Well, I'm glad we have this opportunity.
He should have.